So one of the main concepts with the talk of re-enchantment is the micro and the macro, which is inspired by the quote, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. So it's the idea that the individual awakening process is mirrored and is playing out in a macro level. So in the earth and potentially wider than that, there's a macro awakening process. And what I'm going to do today is explain my journey through awakening, including the kind of shadow aspects of depression, psychosis. I will go into detail, so just a heads up, I will be talking about my psychosis and my depression. So give me a heads up if anyone feels uncomfortable with that. But first, what the fuck is enchantment, right? I feel like a lot of times, some people are like, wait, what actually is enchantment? So we'll get that out of the way to begin with. Enchantment, talking personally for me, it's a sense of connection. It's a sense of belonging to something more than what we're used to, or more than what is ordinary or mundane. Like we sense something bigger than ourselves, we sense something that is inherently magical. Now that word magic in itself has kind of got, you know, certain connotations, but for me it's looking at the miraculous elements of being, not from a place of wishful thinking, but from a genuine place of existence, like a genuine place of experience. And what I'm going to argue through this talk and explain and demonstrate through this talk is that actually there are lots of different factors that contribute to the state of disenchantment. There's a sociologist called Max Weber who in the 1900s, the early 1900s, he explained how he was concerned that as a society we were facing disenchantment because of the rise of the scientific method and the ideas behind the material universe. Now, the issue of disenchantment is that you kind of strip a lot of meaning from existence, if not all meaning from existence. You view yourself as just a body, separate from the universe, and that everything out there is kind of mechanical and physical. There's no real meaning behind it. We make meaning inherently, and that's an act. Depending on how cynical you are, it could just be an act of desperation to try and find meaning in this kind of flat void where we're like the only intelligent life and billions and billions of stars, galaxies. It's all a bit depressing, isn't it, really, when you think of it like that. What I'm going to argue is that actually the fabric of existence itself is spiritual. It's beyond the material realm. So this in itself is an expansive paradigm. It's one that I've benefited from because I found that certain worldviews tend to make you kind of diminish, ignore, or even repress certain intelligences that we have that say this is impossible. Which is why I say in the meditation to check in with how you feel, because we actually all have pretty good bullshit senses within our hearts, right? And we kind of have a sense of knowing. And as I talk, check in with that bullshit sensor. Don't take anything that I say as gospel. You know, question everything that I say. And be as skeptical as you like, but try and do it from a place of heart, not from a place of mind, because the mind will always find reasons to argue against this stuff. Yeah, so part of this is looking at the depression epidemic and mental health widely, and the way that we're treating mental health, the way that we treat mental health within a very narrow framework. And actually looking at the process of healing, looking at the process of alchemy. So transforming healings, transforming things like depression, psychosis, anxiety into awakening processes, into spiritual unfolding, remembering ourselves. I put at the bottom, this is a conversation I had recently, and it kind of came up in the conversation. I feel that all of us on some level have a spiritual hunger. Ken Wilber, who's a transpersonal psychologist, he refers to these as Atman projects. Atman in Hinduism is the divine spark within. And the idea of an Atman project is basically we filter our need for spiritual fulfillment through things like drugs, sex, food, money, power, etc., etc. I'm going to go a step further and even argue that on a societal level, there's a huge gaslighting. Are you guys familiar with this term? So it's a form of, it's used as a term to describe emotional abuse and manipulation. I can see parallels between this idea and also how, as a society, we've almost gaslighted the spiritual dimension so that people that are highly sensitive are taught what you're experiencing isn't real, and it creates real fragmentation in people's experience. So the micro, aka my story, that's just a fancy way of saying it. I was born into an enchanted world. It was something that I think we all experience, you know, when we're kind of young. The way that we view the world from this place is expansive. There's a sense of connection. We don't necessarily question things as much. I was always incredibly sensitive as a kid, but I would say that I had a pretty happy childhood. There were certainly issues in my family, but nothing that at certain times was enough to detract from kind of magical elements of being. I remember from like a young age being a very outgoing, clearly a fan of 101 Dalmatians at some point in my life, and poor haircuts. But I would say that I was a very happy child in the most. As I say, I was very sensitive. So for me, you know, like hearing my parents argue, for example, that would be a lot. And also kind of, without knowing it, sensing different things. And I guess on some level, learning to escape through imagination. When I felt that these sensing capabilities weren't valid, like I was making it all up, right? So there was already from quite a young age, probably up at the age of 10 or 11, I was born, as most of us are, into a society that generally says these experiences aren't possible. But in my younger years, I would say I was fairly content. From the age of around 15, so I experienced quite a few different challenges in my life. There was a lot of death, so I'd lost quite a few people that were very close to me around that time. And I'd say I first experienced depression at the age of 15, but then I had absolutely no idea what it was. So for me, it was just like, well, I feel really sad and I don't know why, and I can't really articulate why I feel this way, and I didn't articulate why I felt that way. I kind of kept it quiet for a long time. And I was meditating earlier today on this topic, and I remember a conversation with my girlfriend at the time when I was feeling depressed, around the age of 15 or 16, and the only way I could describe it was, all I can say is, if I was to win the lottery right now, it wouldn't make a difference. It's interesting because now I look back, I'm like, was that a spiritual revelation that I had? Like, that happiness comes from within. But at the time, it definitely wasn't. It was just a way of me explaining that this state couldn't really change. That kind of continued. It kind of spiraled. I then developed panic disorder, pretty extreme panic disorder. At its height, I was probably experiencing 2 or 3 or more panic attacks every day. So my life was depression, anxiety. There was a point where I was like, I don't know really any sensation other than depression, anxiety, like numbness or anxiety. This was a kind of oscillation that I was experiencing. At the same time, outwardly, it was pretty hard for people to tell. A lot of the time, it was pretty hard for people to tell. But it got to the point where the girlfriend I mentioned, her mum passed away when we were together, and from what I can tell, this marked the beginning of a kind of fragmentation where I started to minimise my own feeling, my own sensations, because I felt that my experience wasn't valid, that my grief wasn't valid, because for her it was much more real, it's much more intimate. So I needed to shift into this kind of helper role and then minimise the way that I was feeling, and minimise the way that I was feeling, and just suppress and push this down. And that in itself, as I can see now, contributed to the depression and anxiety, and is a thread that continues for a while. That was a huge, impactful event in my kind of life circumstances. There were a few other similar events, and at the age of 18 I was working at a law firm in Bristol, and my anxiety was sky high. Like every morning, I'd wake up and I was like, I've got another day, I've got to go through this, got to go through these kind of sensations. And even from that age, I remember starting to read like self-help literature and just being like, how the fuck do I handle this? Like this is overwhelming. I need to try and find ways to cope, but it didn't really seem to be working for a while. And there was a day when I was 18, I got promoted in work in this law firm, and I'm sat at my desk, and I've got one simple task to do, and all I have to do is call a law firm, call a solicitor, and ask for an email address. Which seems easy, right? It seems like a very simple thing, but my anxiety levels were so high anyway, they were already sky high, that when I was asked to do this, this task, all of a sudden I can't do it. People are going to find out that I'm nervous. This used to be a real big thing. People will see that I'm nervous. I don't want anyone to tell, because it's almost like there was so much below the surface. I felt if someone could almost see it, then it would just be too much for anyone to handle. I didn't make the phone call. Instead, what I did, I managed to kind of look busy until lunch, and then I left, and I called my mum, and I just said to her, can you pick me up? And she did, of course she did. And that was a point where she knew, obviously mother's intuition, she knew something wasn't right, and that was when I was put on antidepressants for the first time. And that was also my first suicidal spell. So this was the first time in my life where I guess the pain that I was in got to the stage where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I kind of was really struggling to find ways to handle these kind of sensations. In terms of depression, I've been on two spells. So this was the first spell around the age of 18, and then I was on antidepressants again. The depression itself has evolved and changed, and it kind of, in a different paradigm, I will go on to that, it has a different impact. But at this point in my life, I was experiencing a real strong case of disenchantment. Because also, contributing to this, I would remember there'd be days, like usually like a Sunday, and I would be on my bed, and I would just be in like a real heightened state of anxiety, or like despair, just thinking about how fucking meaningless everything is. Just like, what are we doing here? And like thoughts of death ringing around my ears, it just really, it was panic, it was terror, it was something that was really deep and innate, and the worldview that I had was not supporting any of the suffering that I was experiencing. It really wasn't. I promise you it gets a bit lighter, but not yet, so hold on. The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight. That's a quote from Joseph Campbell. It's one of my favourite quotes, probably for obvious reasons, for the nature of this talk. Do you know you're famous? Things didn't really get easier. I just got better at distracting myself. I got better at hiding behind drugs, behind sex, behind food, behind festivals, not behind ice skating. I was fucking awful at ice skating.
Wow.
But I just to step back, so I had my first kind of session in counselling around the age of 18 or 19, which was more of a setback because it wasn't very effective at all. But then I kind of got better at handling these things in a way that I felt I was handling them. I wasn't actually handling them. I was just pushing them away. But life has a funny way of kind of slapping you around the face with this stuff, right? And for me, that slap in the face came one morning at university. I was drinking a lot, I was taking drugs, I was partying, and on the surface level had a very attractive life. But one day I got a message from an old work colleague to say that my friend Jamie had died in a motorcycle accident. And it's, as far as I can remember, the only time in my life where I genuinely like received like news and my first reaction was like, this isn't true. Like, it's not true, and I put my phone down and my first thought was, why would someone joke about this? This is really not a nice thing for someone to joke about. And that was obviously the shock, and then more people started contacting me, and then really what I experienced was the most profound grief, and by this point I'd lost like grandparents and uncle, my girlfriend's like mother, and there were lots of like different things going on, but the sudden nature of this had such an impact on my psyche that I essentially broke down, and my sense of reality also broke down in this process. And I was certainly not swimming at that point in the waters that Joseph Campbell talks about. I was certainly drowning. But I hid it. I continued to hide it. And I was really good at hiding the way that I was feeling. And in this process, initially, it was really interesting that the first time I heard this news, my instinctive reaction was like, I can learn from this. You know, it's going to make me value life. And then I kind of slowly regressed into a grief-induced, possibly drug-induced state of psychosis. This psychosis lasted a long time. The acute stage, and I will go into detail, so let me know, if anyone's uncomfortable. The acute stage was really full of heightened paranoia, like extreme paranoia, where I couldn't even take a full bus journey. I couldn't actually go to the stop that I intended because I was convinced that everyone, and like the irony of being in this position now is not lost on me. It's mental. But any situation that I was in, I felt, and there's something that is quite narcissistic at times about paranoia and psychosis, because I felt like I was the centre of the universe, but everyone really just didn't like the centre of the universe and wanted to get rid of the centre of the universe, right? And I was still taking drugs, and I was like, this festival, as fun as it looks, I had a real strong psychotic break. Started to hear voices. That was when the kind of auditory hallucinations began. And there was a moment where I was on a train platform in Derbyshire. I was at a festival on the farm, I think that's where I comes from. And I say to my mate Ben, I was like, Ben, can you hear those people like partying over there? And at the time he was like, yeah, I can. But it turns out no one was partying. I was just, hallucinating these sounds. For some people, these things happen when they take drugs and they go away. For me, they just didn't really go away. They just kind of stuck around for a very long time. And throughout this experience, it was an immense challenge just to kind of exist, really, and to go about in the world. I was still studying, I was still going to uni, I was still going to lectures, but I remember one lecture, I was writing notes on my pad, and part of my brain was convinced that I was scribbling, right? Like I was just scribbling on the page. And there were other times where I was getting ready, like we're having pre-drinks, ready to go out, and I was in the shower, and I was unsure if I was screaming at the top of my voice when I was in the shower. From where I am now, and from where I can see now, I understand that these experiences were a fear, right? I'll go into this later in more depth, but these were a fear of almost being discovered for being crazy. And it was like I was trying to hide all of this stuff, and these kind of hallucinations, a lot of the time, it would be like, God, is that guy right? What's wrong with that guy? It was like a loop. It was a loop of what I was fearing within myself. Actually, as we'll get onto, more of like part of the healing mechanism. Something in my psyche was trying to point out that I really wasn't okay, but it actually manifested as the voices of others. So I could be in a room, be a conversation, I would leave, that conversation would continue in my head to the point where I was like, that's definitely not the conversation that I just left. You know, that's now in my own mind, in my own kind of reality. Oh, this is a good bit. We can breathe a sigh of relief now. This is where it kind of lightens up a little bit. It's not, and of course, it's not like a linear progression. It's not like I had these experiences and it was stopped and then this kind of awakening process occurred. But what was happening in my experience at that time is that I was suddenly drawn to, throughout any kind of intellectual understanding, I was drawn to meditation, I was drawn to spiritual practice. I'd actually bought a book called Essential Spirituality by Roger Walsh, who is now my adopted granddad. I interviewed him. It was a delight. But I got this book, and when I first bought it, I opened the pages, and when I was reading through the book initially, nothing there. Like I was not interested at all in what the pages contained, basically. It felt very flat, and I kind of was very dismissive of it. Going through the psychosis and then moving into meditation, so I started Headspace. I genuinely should get royalties, I say this every time. Always promote Headspace for free. But this was a kind of portal into meditation, because I'd read, I'd studied, but I never really got into it. I never really found my flow with it. And then Headspace, I found like really good instruction, and turned to meditation because of the scientific. So I was also very atheistic. This is an important part of this narrative. Very atheistic, very science-minded, and I was drawn to meditation because of the amount of literature around the benefits of it, essentially. But then what happened was, and what I wasn't expecting, was a kind of opening of spiritual receptivity, to the extent where I could pick up the same book and it had a completely different impact. It was like the words would just become part of my being and consciousness as I was kind of assimilating this information. It went beyond, and this should be a review on Amazon because they'd sell a lot of copies. So it went beyond this sensation of kind of, you read, it's like objective information, and then subjectively I'm kind of gaining knowledge. I actually felt my state change, and it's the same with The Power of Now. It's the same with books like this. I felt a real shift in my consciousness through reading this stuff. And that led me to then start questioning a lot of the stuff that I thought was true. It was an awakening process. So the psychosis itself and the anxiety was part of an awakening process that I just did not have a framework for. But what I was doing, I was starting to get building blocks and to create a new worldview through books like Essential Spirituality. And to use Roger's quote, good old Rog, out of the ashes of ego arises a phoenix-like, a new self-image which will die and be reborn. Until there is no self-image left to die, and only the essence remains. From one perspective, that sounds, it is intense, there's no avoiding the intensity of this, but it's an important point, because in any spiritual awakening process, there's a lot of shadow work, and we have to confront things like death and rebirth, and my experiences forced me to address death, basically. I could not ignore it through the kind of ideation I had of ending my own life, but also through losing people and the grief that ensued from that. One framework, the framework I was living from for a very long time, told me that I was crazy, that I'd lost my mind, that I was, having some kind of psychotic break, there's not really a chance of recovery, I was pathological, etc., etc. But when I started to explore wider paradigms, I started to understand what I was experiencing from a completely different perspective, a perspective that was actually better matched to my genuine experience, like a perspective that I felt was more truthful to what I was experiencing. And also through meditation, it became experiential. It wasn't just like an intellectual exercise. I was starting to experience like there is separation between my thoughts and my feelings, and that was a real game changer. I'd done a lot of work around cognitive behavioural therapy and kind of restructuring thought and more traditional Western approaches, but this separation between what I am and what I was experiencing, the depression, the anxiety, the psychosis, that became quite a profound shift. Even, it took time, because initially, the experience of what I was going through with the psychosis was essentially an experience of oneness, an experience of connection, combined with things like an empathic ability to sense the emotions of other people. That quickly becomes psychotic when you're filtering through trauma, unresolved trauma. When you believe that it's not possible, you're going to create a psychological split in the mind, in the psyche. What then started to shift through meditation was I was having oneness experiences of unconditional love, from a much different perspective. So it was a similar thing, but it wasn't filtered so much through trauma. And I was like, what the fuck is this? This is weird. And just having kind of experiences of bliss, also not on drugs, which was nice, but on drugs as well at that time. But it was really opening me up, and I was developing a different sense of intelligence, essentially. Then there are lots of cycles of disenchantment, the dark night of the soul, lots of trauma to work through, lots of shadow work. This is ongoing, it always will be ongoing. But for the sake of this slide, I'll put it there as well. There was a lot of unlearning going on in this process, and by unlearning, I'm just peeling back beliefs about myself, about the world, in a quest to through self-inquiry, find some form of truth, essentially. And through that, I started to develop a lot of clarity of mind. And this took a long time, and it still is ongoing. But I'd say within the last few years, a real clarity of mind and actually a shift in terms of my entire perception and experience of the psyche itself. A lot more expansive in terms of my consciousness as well, feelings of kind of oneness and connection. When they first occur, and when they did first occur, they were incredibly overwhelming. I'll talk about grounding, but it's possible to have really intense spiritual experiences, but to be almost kind of unsettled by them because of their intensity. And that's something that we need actually a lot of responsibility about, and a lot of responsibility, because you can go one extreme and put all the emphasis on the kind of spiritual highs, but really that's not what spiritual practice with the intention to grow is, essentially. There's I can't remember this, Maslow does the hierarchy of needs, but there's also a hierarchy of values. I can't remember if that's also Abraham Maslow. The hierarchy of values, this is really interesting because people, when they have spiritual experiences, their values shift. So I started to notice that at the same time my values were shifting, the things that I was prioritising in life were starting to change. And basically my entire perception and understanding of who I am was shifting. And I even understood that all I am is shifting consistently, like there's no fixed sense of self. My perceptions also have changed in terms of colour perception, sound perception, and I'll go more on to these experiences later as well. Also my sensation of time, non-linear, cyclical experiences, like all just weird shit basically that is also really cool. That's how I like to define it. The last two words there, words are inherently empty, they're just symbols, right? So this is for me a symbol, freedom is a symbol of the awakening of the way that I was imprisoning myself through thought, and the way that I was imprisoned with anxiety, and how anxiety prevented me from doing things, and how depression prevented me from doing things, and psychosis. And that personal freedom that I was cultivating, kind of find and then lose it, and then find and lose it in the period of growth. But that was something that was very life-changing. And then last but not least, enchantment. This was something that actually came a little bit further along the path, where I just started to become mesmerised and saw and perceived and sensed in a different way. Let me know if I'm going too fast as well. If there's any questions that you have, please. So, on to Carl Jung's psychological functions. We are so accustomed to the apparently rational nature of our world that we can scarcely imagine anything happening that cannot be explained by common sense. So Jung he has more functions of the psyche, but these are the four kind of key functions. It's a good way of condensing our different experiences. But these are intuiting, sensing, feeling, and thinking. Now in the Western world, most of us are kind of top-heavy. We spend a lot of time in the thinking mind, the rational mind. And we actually, from the age of enlightenment, so this is around the 17th or 18th century, the age of enlightenment kind of pedestaled the intellect, pedestaled reason, and diminished and minimized the other three. Sensing is, of course, our ability to just sense our environment and the information that we're receiving. Feeling, as Jung describes it, is a kind of innate discernment. This is agreeable, this isn't agreeable. Whereas intuiting is kind of a higher intelligence. It's something that's beyond the intellect. We intuit and understand certain aspects of nature and ourselves and others in a very different way. The reason I include this slide, it's really important to understand the shift that occurs through disenchantment to re-enchantment. Because when I was experiencing psychosis, right, I was still sensing, these four psychological functions were still part of my being, but my thinking, my rational mind, that was part of me that was starting to resist and reject my experience. The judging mind came in, and a lot of the kind of fraction, and a lot of the fracturing within my own psyche was caused by this thinking function. It was caused by kind of pedestaling of rationality. And we kind of are led to believe that the universe is rational. Newtonian physics, so the idea of a physical universe, a mechanical universe, also plays into this kind of worldview. But this is really important to understand that through the awakening process, we're learning to trust each of these other functions. And this is part of the challenge, really, learning to trust, because I really didn't trust my sensing capability, or my kind of reading of other people's emotions, my sensing, my intuition. I've completely stopped trusting those. So the idea of magic, the immaterial and meaning. Dreams are the letters of the self, that the self writes us every night. Louise von Franz, she's a Jungian psychologist. I mentioned dreams because linked also to Jung's four psychological functions. I also didn't trust or have an innate understanding or appreciation for dreams and their kind of capability. About a week after Jamie died, I had a dream, and we used to, at work we used to go to the pub. We went to the Seven Stars, we'd have a few pints at Friday lunchtime, and it was where we spent most of our time bonding. And in this dream, I walk into the pub, and there's no one else there, there's no one behind the bar, and Jamie stood there. And I walk in, look at him, he looks at me, and he just says, "I'm okay." That's all that he says, he just says, "I'm okay." Jung emphasizes the importance of meaning. The importance of meaning behind the experiences that we have within itself is part of the experience. Now, the sensation of this dream was almost more real than a lot of my waking experiences, you know. A lot of the experiences in dreams are more lucid, and I was also having a lot of lucid dreams around this time. But at that time I didn't trust. I still didn't really trust, and I was like, well, I use this example because it was such a profound experience. It was almost more lifelike than life itself. But instantly, I kind of woke up and just dismissed it because I was not trusting these different psychological functions. And this is a really good example of how you can kind of cut off that part of ourselves. And if we do cut off the part of ourselves that is innately spiritual and connected, this is where we feel disenchanted and we feel disconnected. And then we pursue connection through these Atman projects that Wilbur talks about. So the idea is that through the magic, we start to feel, sense, we kind of develop an innate wisdom that we have. Synchronicities, this is a beautiful part of awakening, like synchronicities kind of happen more and more to the extent that they're completely illogical and completely far-fetched, and you're just like, this is impossible for this to happen. I've got no rational explanation, because it's irrational in nature, it's only connected by meaning itself. This is part of the magic of the experiences that we can have. In Letters from the South, the relevance of this is essentially Jung talks of dreams as bridging the unconscious and the conscious mind. So kind of bringing ourselves into wholeness. And when we dream, it's almost like our innate wisdom is guiding us. And this is the same in meditation. We each have an innate wisdom, an innate yearning to heal and to become whole that we can experience when we kind of allow ourselves to. In addition, we develop psychic capabilities, or we kind of tune in. A lot of us have them anyway, but we kind of diminish them. We can kind of tune into this more and become more heightened and more grounded. For example, I'm much better now because I can control and regulate my own emotions. When I pick up on other people's emotions, I'm not muddying them with my own, I'm not judging them. And this is something that kind of happens at some point. I'm like, oh, like, is that mine? Is that someone else's? Whereas there's a lot more clarity around that, purely because it's something that has been worked on. Visions as well. These, if we look at I'll mention briefly holotropic states of consciousness. If we look at visions, it's the idea that we kind of obtain information that is transcendental, that goes beyond our limited sense of self. And visions are a part of that, as well as innate knowing. We just kind of know certain things. Magic transforming mental health. So when I first did this presentation, it was at the Science and Non-Duality conference, which is why I've done a lot of slides around non-duality. Alan Watts, you are the universe experiencing itself. The idea of non-duality is a sense of oneness. It's something that can only be experienced. Language in itself is dual. Anytime we enter the realm of language, the realm of concept, we're creating a sense of separation. So non-duality is very much linked to enchantment, because when we're in an enchanted state, we're experiencing a sense of connection. Like, I'm not actually a separate being. I'm not the subject observing something outside of myself, but we're actually the same. There's something in us that is very much connected. The state of disenchantment, of duality, this physical universe that I'm separate from, is very much separate from the state of enchantment where there is a sense of connection. So disenchantment is linked to ego separation, so the idea I'm a body and an ego and that's it. Freud did a lot of work in depth psychology. I don't know if you've seen the diagram like the iceberg, like the conscious mind, the subconscious. Joseph Campbell, I read this recently, I don't know if I've actually memorised it properly, but he said something along the lines of Freud was essentially searching for fish while sitting on a well, right? In the sense that he was focused on the individual subconscious, but there's actually a lot more. It's a lot more expansive. There's like a collective unconscious that Carl Jung talks about. So disenchantment is very much ego separation. Now you imagine when you're kind of going through psychosis, I'm experiencing oneness, but I'm a separate self. So I kind of almost stop this flow in a way, because I'm seeing Ricky, this idea of ego, Ricky is the center of the universe, right? Ricky's the center of the universe. When in reality, all of us are the center of the universe. It is just one. And within that, we go beyond ego into a sense of connection. And then oneness becomes a pleasant experience. Disenchantment, however, is fear-based. It bases reality on the external. So I'm looking outwards at the external. It's a very disempowered state to be in. It's part of the victim mindset. So we feel like I'm a separate being, and to get what I want, to feel happy, to get this, to get that, I have to manipulate my environment. I have to change the external world to become fulfilled. And that then leads to us blaming the external world when we're not fulfilled, and we kind of disempower ourselves through that. Can't see that properly, I think it's in opposition, so it's the idea. At the moment I'm meditating on ahimsa, which is an Advaita Vedanta term, one of the precepts for non-violence. And the idea is not to strike or obstruct the present. The idea of a disenchantment and a dualistic state is that we're always striking and obstructing the present. On the flip side, in an enchanted state, we're very much in flow with the universe. There's a lot of faith with the unfolding of how things are going. We feel connection, we feel oneness. It's very much love-based, not from like an empty platitude, but from a genuine experience of love and connection. Reality, now through the process of self-inquiry, through the nature of self-inquiry, and Alan Watts is a real pioneer in this respect in terms of bringing this work to the West. Reality becomes subjective, truth is subjective, it's something that we can, as part of kind of the microcosms, the so below, in that opening quote, we can understand truths about the universe through digging into ourselves and going into our own psyche, not through this container that Freud created, but through the ocean, the cosmic ocean that we're all part of. It's an empowered state. It's a state that empowers us to always learn and to always grow. Because the idea of a spiritual awakening, the idea of spirituality within itself is that we're all here to learn and to grow. And that's what the challenge is, right? We incarnate to learn and to grow. And to kind of remember ourselves and to express ourselves in the way that we are here to express. So these are two kind of separate, disenchantment and enchantment, two separate mindsets. Or really, the first is a mindset, this is more of a direct experience. But these give you an idea. It's not to say that like you're one or the other. Of course, like you can kind of go in and out, you can oscillate between the two. You might find that in some areas of life, you're more disenchanted than you are enchanted, etc., etc. But this just gives you an idea of the differences there. The limits of rationality and the leap of faith. To have faith is to lose your mind and to win God. Is a Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, from the 17th century. He believed that a leap of faith is necessary to embrace the absurd and to experience God. I just said the G word, God, there you go. Sometimes I feel uncomfortable, which is also absurd in itself. But to experience, now we look at what Jung talks about and the idea of rationality, and we live in a world that has completely pedestaled the intellect, that we have to take a leap of faith to experience the oneness, to experience the connection. And that is to go beyond our kind of ego sense of self. And to embrace the absurd, and to understand that actually the nature of this stuff is not rational. It is completely absurd in and of itself, and our minds can't really comprehend it. And this is an important thing. If we try and comprehend intellectually, our minds are going to frazzle. We're going to kind of shut down and face psychological defences in opening up. And that's, again, if you look at psychosis, this is kind of experience of a psychological defence. I'm closing myself off from these other experiences. So embracing magic embraces the absurd, and our challenge on the path is to learn the language of the cosmos, to tap into these other intelligences and these other parts of ourselves, and to actually learn a different language beyond rationality. And just an important note here, like the ego will always protest, always. And I find that the closer I have these experiences that are very kind of illuminating, and these senses of oneness and connection, and they're very much mystical in their nature. And then my ego is like, that's bullshit. Where did that come from? And it starts to minimize, right? It starts to minimize my experience. This is also part of my own journey, coming from a very scientific, atheistic background. I've had to kind of unlearn a lot, and there's still part of my intellect that's like not quite on board, but getting there. Like the more I read, particularly around like transpersonal psychology, holotropic states of consciousness. I'm going off on a tangent, but anyway, ego will resist these experiences. Any questions before we go on to the macro stuff? No? Perhaps I'm going to sip of water. Does anyone in here like conspiracy theories? This isn't a conspiracy theory, but it's kind of in that ballpark, you know, like. Okay, so worldviews, reality and corruptibility. What you think you are is a belief to be undone. It's from A Course in Miracles, which I've not read, actually, so that's yeah, there you go. Anyways. What I want to make, the point I want to make with worldviews is that corruptibility, right, we talk of the different parts, the different psychological functions that we have. We can only become corruptible through one psychological function, and that is thinking. The only way that we are corruptible is through the thoughts that we have. The thoughts that we have that circulate our minds, that are inherited, that are occasionally dogmatic, they're the only things that are corruptible. Our spirits are not corruptible, our hearts are not corruptible, our intuition is not corruptible, but our thoughts are. Now, understanding how worldviews shape our reality is all based in the conceptual realm. People like Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, Bill Hicks, they talk of the importance of direct experience for a reason, and that's because in direct experience, we move beyond the conceptual realm, which basically is, this is what I think the world is. This is how I'm going to label the world. This is how I'm going to label reality. When what we're doing, we're applying our lens to our direct experience. So what happens is we have a collective consensus reality, we have a collective worldview that has certain beliefs. So in the West, the prevalent belief of a material universe, of the intellect, of Newtonian physics, you know, these kind of things. We have cultural beliefs, conditioning, agenda, inherited thoughts and dogma. Different belief systems from economic drivers, from the advertising industry, from lots of different areas, become beliefs that we internalize, right? So the process of internalizing a belief is essentially, I'm told something about reality, I've got a choice. I choose to accept it, I choose to challenge it, or I choose to understand my own truth through my own direct experience. The reason we become corruptible is because if we are based in our experience and our reality off the conceptual, I like this, I don't like that, this is possible, that's not possible, etc., etc., then certain institutions or certain people, it can even be your peers, a lot of us, it's our parents, right? We grow up, our parents have their own worldview, generally filtered through their own trauma and their own experiences, and they say, watch out, Ricky, when you go outside, be careful, it's quite dangerous out there, don't get hurt. So I'm like, oh, this is a dangerous world, don't get hurt, now I feel anxious, this is weird. We assimilate and we digest thoughts, we inherit them. You know, some of them are inherited from our parents, some from family, some from, you know, loads of different sources, but basically, if we accept these thoughts in blind faith, we become corruptible, we become controlled. We're now being controlled by a system that essentially gives us our thoughts. So it's like, here you go, here's a pre-made worldview, put that helmet on and see the world through these lenses. So what we do then with our reality, we're not doing the work, if we're not promoting our sense of truth, if we're not kind of moving beyond the thinking mind, we project as a cycle, projection and perception. So we put out what we expect to perceive, and then we take in what we put out. And if that's corruptible, it doesn't seem necessarily like a big deal to say that there are certain cultural beliefs. But in your day-to-day life, if you're in this untested, unquestioned, corruptible process, you've got thoughts that aren't yours that are affecting your reality. Your experience is then dictated by these thoughts. Right? I'm writing an ebook at the moment. That was such a nice plug. Yes. Mindsets for mindfulness. If you sign up to me in this after the talk, you can get it when it's done. I talk about, what time is it? I've gone on a tangent. I talk about a story, right? I go home to Bristol, my parents always watch the BBC News. It's always on in the background, and I'm like, why the fuck are you watching the BBC News? It's bullshit. Can you just turn it off? Like, I just find it really annoying, and that's something I have to work on. Not that you get a victim mindset there, you know, and everything. But one day, I go back, and there's a story on the news, and it's a sad story, but some guy, some like 76-year-old in Australia, was killed in a magpie attack. Have you heard of it? Are you familiar? No. Right, a 76-year-old, we shouldn't laugh, but there's something that is quite funny about what I'm about to tell you. A 76-year-old died in Australia by magpie attack, not from the magpie itself. He was cycling, the magpie attacked him, he cycled, hit a fence, and hit his head. It was a freak accident, right? This happened. The reason I say this is because it became news, right? The other side of the world is in my room in Bristol that I'm hearing about magpies killing people. Magpies killing people. I actually did research, right? The odds of getting killed by a magpie, I think are like 100 or 1,000 times less than getting struck by lightning twice.
They will attack you.
But they will. Just fend them off. But the odds are so minuscule. I'm about to leave the house, right? It's a nice day, sun shining. As I'm about to walk out the door, Mum's like, Rick, watch out for magpies. Mum! Fucking come on. And so if I agree with blind faith, right, I'm like, well, watch out for magpies. I go walk in the park, it's a sunny day, I see a magpie, I feel anxiety. The anxiety that I'm feeling in that moment has been triggered by an event that happened the other side of the world, an event that is so incredibly rare, it's more likely I'll get struck by lightning twice, on that very walk. But I've become so corruptible that my actual emotional reaction to what I'm seeing, it's like a magpie just chilling in a tree, is causing me fear, it's causing me anxiety. This is one story about a magpie. And you can imagine the effect that the news media and themselves have, and the fear control, all these kind of mechanisms that go on. Anyway, that's kind of, yeah, going into conspiracy realm. But, point being, this is the difference between exoteric and esoteric. Esotericism also gets a bit of a bad rep because it's deliberately had a bad rep over the years through the Holy Inquisition and through the idea that if I'm in an institutionalized dogmatic faith, if I discover God within myself, I don't need this institution, so it's a control mechanism. Now, exoteric, which is Greek for outer, I believe, and then esoteric is Greek for inner. Exoteric, a belief system, a worldview. Here's what you believe, here's how you find God, this is true, this isn't. Esoteric, this is based on discovering truth through self-inquiry, through yourself, through your own deductions, your own intuitions, etc., etc. In this process, the idea is that, and people like Terence McKenna and a lot of the psychedelic communities are really on point with this stuff because of what psychedelics do. They essentially disintegrate and dissolve the conceptual realm, so you're then in the realm of direct experience. That's so important because we're experiencing truth beyond what we've digested. I'm aware that I'm sharing a worldview with you. What I will say with that is, again, the idea is to discover these truths for yourself, and that we can be inspired by a worldview or give ourselves permission from a worldview, but we want to always maintain healthy skepticism rather than blind faith, so we can challenge what we hear. We can challenge it intellectually. We can then agree, okay, this sounds agreeable, you know, my feeling, I feel like this is agreeable, now I want to test it for myself. Someone says, you know, you meditate and you experience a sense of oneness, and oh, that sounds nice. I'll try it, and then you try it, and then you start to have experiences, and you're testing it, you're verifying it for yourself. This is the idea of empowerment through esoteric practice. Worldview, so mystical worldview. What is the point? If I've just said all this about worldviews, what's the point of me now giving you a mystical worldview? The map is not the territory, but it can actually open you up, and it can allow you to experience richer and deeper elements of reality because of what I've already explained about our ability to cut off our experiences. So if we actually have a framework and a paradigm, and we're fully conscious and fully aware that that is all it is, it's just a framework. It's just a way of trying to map out these experiences. If we have one that is more expansive, then we can kind of understand spiritual awakening and these kind of processes from a different place. Again, on the macro, we split into dual and non-dual. So dual here is Newtonian physics. Now this has a huge impact on our lives today, even though it was over 100 years ago, like revelations of quantum physics and a huge shift. But the idea of a mechanical material universe, this is one worldview. There's no inherent meaning. Who here, as a show of hands, who here believes or has never even questioned that consciousness originates from the brain? Maybe you've never even thought, but I think about this stuff all the time. But like the reason I ask this question, we are kind of taught, and we believe that consciousness is a product of the brain. There's no scientific evidence for that. Zero. And there never will be, because consciousness is the fabric of existence. And we're not going to be able to find it by kind of breaking down the mechanical, material aspects of our biology, right? But this is the disenchanted worldview. Consciousness, through the process of evolution, I am now conscious, my brain, I kind of scan the external world and I have a sense of self and all this kind of stuff going on. What that means is there's no room for the divine, there's no room for God. Nietzsche said God is dead for this very reason. All of a sudden we find the prevailing worldview, the prevailing religion is the religion of science. This is known as scientism. When we have blind faith in science and its ability to prove truth. So then we start to say, well, you can't prove it with science, it's not true. And you're like, oh, it's not true, I can't prove it, but I've just experienced, oh no, it's not true. And then the worldview starts to impact our experience and we become more disenchanted. Evolution is material. That science will be able to answer everything about existence through the scientific, observable, material method. So I keep burping, it's really inconvenient, right? Fucking hell. Let's get a few, yeah, there we go. So it's the idea that science is, you know, the answer, basically. And it's not to say that science is something to minimize. Science is an incredible tool, but that's what it is, it's a tool. And actually we are also tools, because think about it. What better tool to understand consciousness than a human being with our complex intelligence, right? We can understand consciousness better than any other tool. And we do through self-inquiry, and that's what the ancient traditions have done for millennia. So the shift, and I say mystical because it's the idea, there's another burp, fucking hell, sorry guys. It's the universe trying to send me a message. The mystical worldviews, there's the idea of oneness. It's the idea of God being inherently cosmic intelligent. This is like, that sounds like a really bland way of saying it, but a sense of kind of unity, and we're part of a unified whole. We've just kind of forgotten that. And there's a benevolent guiding force, kind of like Star Wars as well. Quantum physics, so the immaterial basis of existence, and also the non-rational basis. Like quantum physics is irrational. It actually fits more of our thinking processes than rational, Newtonian physics. The universe is a living organism, that consciousness doesn't just begin and end with a human, with a living being. The universe itself is alive. And within that, consciousness is universal. It's intelligent and benevolent. I put the term holotropic there again. There's a great body of work. I'm going to a workshop this weekend. I'm kind of scared, but there you go. Great body of work by Stan Groff and Christina Groff, two transpersonal psychologists. They've studied breath work and the induced states of holotropic consciousness. Holotropic means return to wholeness, I think it's Greek. The idea that through altered states we heal. These are what tribes and indigenous cultures and shamans have been doing for millennia. And there's a lot of scientific proof for this now, that we can enter an altered state and we heal ourselves. There's a healing process. So not only is the universe a living organism, consciousness is universal, and there's a healing mechanism. And in the context of this, there's a healing mechanism for mental health, which implies a benevolence. There's also, and just to say, there's also a kind of indifference of sorts, because there's not a judgment, but there's a benevolence, like a direction that we're moving in. And a lot of people experience oneness as love, and the sense of kind of unconditional love, and higher states of experience. As part of this worldview, divinity is the foundation of material. So the core is actually divine, guided, benevolent. And evolution is spiritual. So this is like a key point with the macro, the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of our material world is driven by the same process that each individual goes through. I'm yearning, I'm going through a disconnection. Now I want to connect with God, I want to connect with something greater. There's a spiritual aspect to my being. Then the world is going through the same process. And the mystery of existence is best understood through self-inquiry. Again, we're the best tools to understand consciousness. This is where shit gets really interesting. Well, actually, I hope it's already interesting, because otherwise Greg Braden, our ancestors devised every method imaginable to alert us to a single fact. Now is a time of the most extraordinary, can't fucking read this quote. Conditions and opportunities that accompany the rarest of events, the shift from one world age to the next. I'm not going to go into details for each of these, but there are loads of prophecies that imply union between the material and the spiritual. And they come from essentially all corners of the globe, even at times when there was no communication. Many different traditions. And the most interesting thing is that all of them point at this time now, this age that we're in right now, as the time when this shift that Greg Braden talks of occurs. That we're actually in that age now. This is the time. The age of Aquarius, the kind of combination of masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang. The Mayan calendar that points to 2012, which is misunderstood. It wasn't so much implied that this was the end of humanity, but just the kind of breaking down, the death before the rebirth of humanity. When I gave this talk in Italy, I realised, I don't think this is too much of a tangent, but basically it's 2019, and there are certain cycles of time too, chakra cycles that last 7 years. And actually, it would imply that any change after the beginning of this prophecy would take at least 7 years to kick in. That's a tangent, anyway. Maitreya, is that right? Maitreya? 2,500 years after the Buddha's death, it was told that someone would come and share the Buddha's teachings for when you're in an age when people are more ready to receive this information. The Omega point, this is Chardin, a French philosopher. He talks of the synthesis of spirit and matter, also occurring around this time. The Aeon of Horus, Kali Yuga, the idea of someone coming to rescue society, the idea of shifting us into the spiritual dimension. And there is a lot of Western traditions too. Rosicrucianism. In the 1600s, they alleged, or it was alleged, that they kind of had the secret, like the kind of secret to existence in humanity, but they were like, nah, we're not ready for it yet. Like, we need to kind of keep this on a down low a bit longer. But again, it was foretold that a time would come when there was a merging, when the enchanted worldview essentially became the way that we live. Spiritual evolution. So I just want to go into this to give a little context. What do I mean by spiritual evolution? Teilhard de Chardin, this is the guy I mentioned. At the heart of every being lies creation's dream of a principle that will one day give organic form to its fragmented treasures. God is unity. Unus mundus, this is also an idea that Jung played with. It's the idea of unity, that we're all connected, and the individual return to wholeness, the balancing of our spiritual selves with our psychological thinking, sensing capabilities is also being mirrored on the macro scale. Epigenesis is the idea that if mind, I think this is a Gnostic, there's a Western, I can't remember what faith this idea came from. But again, it's the idea that the universe is mind. That if there is mind, if we have mind within a microcosm, the universe itself is mind. Non-duality, this is also a term that's kind of used quite a lot now. It's got a lot of weight behind it because it also sounds quite scientific. Again, the idea that we live in oneness. But fundamentally, with all of this stuff, consciousness leads the dance. It's the idea that rather than just a physical universe, the fabric is consciousness, is spiritual, and that is going through an evolution process. Now some quantum physics. Einstein, yes. Quantum worldview, this is really significant. Because if we're talking of an age, a process where all of these things combine, then we need to have science and spirituality also combined. They need to be compatible. You couldn't just say like, I'm going to favour spirituality if it completely goes against science and our, the tools and the great minds that we have. The Einstein quote, the most beautiful and most profound experience is a sensation of the mystical. It's the sower of all true science. Einstein was as much a philosopher as he was a scientist, and it was his imagination that allowed him to get a lot of the breakthroughs and a lot of the insights that he had. And also for him to understand the limitations of traditional materialistic science. So I touched upon this earlier, but the quantum worldview, this basis is immaterial. It's kind of energetic, vibrational, but it's not material substance. There are lots of areas in quantum physics that are irrational. There's actually as well an area of psychology that is very recent, is looking at quantum psychology. It's actually looking at how our brains and our thinking processes almost mirror the quantum process. Like, we don't just think step by step rationally, we're able to have multiple potentials. So this is like, on a quantum level, there's the idea that an atom has like potential. Like, I'm not an expert in quantum physics, so please correct me if I'm going off, but essentially an atom has many potentials and infinite possibilities on a quantum level. Our minds do. We play with possibilities all the time. Then we choose a possibility and we stick with that and kind of let go of the rest. This is what an atom does on a quantum level. It's irrational. I've said that, I think, a few times. Non-locality and quantum entanglement, these are also really important factors. So the idea of non-locality was an experiment that's been repeated numerous times, where two atoms are separated, and one is stimulated in one way, and the atom that's been separated responds. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, right? Two atoms are separated an infinite amount of space. They could be the other side of the universe, and they respond in harmony. Non-locality is the biggest evidence we have of a unified field. I'm not going to go like into concepts of time and space, but the idea that it's not like I'm this far away from something. In a physical sense, we are, but with a spiritual or quantum level, there's a connection and also an interaction between atoms that defies the physical realm. Potentiality I've touched upon. A causal connection. So this is the idea, like with Newtonian physics, there's a cause and effect. I don't want to break that, but I throw it and it hits the ground. There's a cause and effect. On a quantum level, this stuff's unpredictable. There's no logical cause and effect. Jung had conversations with Wolfgang Pauli, a quantum physicist at the time. He also spoke with Einstein. They were fascinated by the idea of a causal connections around experiences like synchronicity. Then there's the observer effect. The difference is that even just observing certain particles can have, because we're observing them, like we're moulding our realities to different degrees. So there's a lot of a wealth of essentially unknown, because it's not like we have a definitive answer, but so much to back up this kind of worldview, and it certainly does not go against the idea of a material universe, a cosmic, intelligent universe. Quantum consciousness, this is taking the idea of connection into the quantum level. And universal fine-tuning, which I think I'm maybe realising I'm a bit of a geek, but fine-tuning of the universe is really fucking cool. It's really cool. Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm kind of talking about, I don't want to lose. We all good? In their head? Yeah, good, great. Quantum magic, that's a term that I came up with. If it sticks. No one understands quantum physics. When I was at Science and Non-Duality, I actually asked if there was a quantum physicist in the room, and there was. And she was like, "You're doing alright." So I was like, "Great, that's validation. I feel good now." No one really understands it, and the best we can do is come up with theories to try and explain a lot of this stuff, because it's just confusing. It's it's unpredictable. We don't really get what it's all about. Maybe we never will. But to argue for the sake of this worldview on a quantum level, there are theories. There are theories in quantum science by very esteemed physicists that back up this stuff. So one theory, so this is the idea of cosmo-psychism, which is very recent. But this combines holism, so this is the idea that the universe is interconnected, unified whole, so similar to the mind. Again, on a quantum level, this has been explored as a potentiality. Most interesting with this though is panpsychism. Panpsychism has got a lot of credit in the scientific communities. It's the idea that to explain consciousness, because consciousness is the hard problem of science. No one gets it. Alan Watts, I think, says it's something, it's like the eye trying to see itself. If consciousness is universal and it's the fabric of existence, we're not just going to be able to find it like in a room. Oh, I find consciousness, there it is. It's always going to be like trying to chase our shadow, right? Panpsychism is an argument that says that atoms in themselves contain consciousness. It's not like that glass is aware that we're talking right now, although it may be, right? It could, it's not, I'm joking. But the idea that atoms, even on a very fundamental level, have some kind of consciousness. The more complex, so with panpsychism, the more complex the system, the more complex the consciousness. This kind of makes sense. From bacteria to insects to mammals and then to humans, like with more complex systems, we have more complex consciousness. But you can't just stop and say like, oh yeah, like the human, this is again going back to the idea of separation and materialism. If we then say the human is the most complex system, because actually you go beyond that and say, well no, the actual universe itself is more complex. That's a bigger system of consciousness. Now we come on to the fine tuning of the universe. I've not listed the different, I think there are about 16 or 17. 16 or 17 different, I think there might even be more than that, but different states on a physical. So we're talking about Newtonian physics now, material physics. That if any of these criteria were even the slightest bit different, right? The slightest bit different, there would be no life. There would be no life. And there are certain things like the ratio between gravity and dark matter, hydrogen, all of this stuff that clearly I'm not an expert on. But there's a lot. And I would really recommend you look up the fine-tuning of the universe, because basically we are primed for life. Now, if you've got a materialistic background, you'll just be like, oh God, it's just good luck, isn't it? What about the Big Bang? That was a miracle. We'll have a miracle, and then we'll have another miracle. The universe is literally the exact environment to the 0.0, infinite naught potential to create life. I just to clarify this point, if any of these things were even 0.001% different, life wouldn't be possible. The odds, they've been calculated, I think Roger Penrose calculated the odds of this actually happening. There's like 1 in 10 to the whatever hundreds, like it's beyond even what the mind can comprehend. The universe is fine-tuned for life. But it's not like the universe was fine-tuned for life, like the universe was there and then there was life. It took, what, 13 billion years? So 13 billion years, 13 billion years from the Big Bang. This is a Big Bang, and all of a sudden, the kind of evolution and expansion of the universe that is now primed for our life, for us to be here in this time and space. But not immediately, 13 billion years in the future, which kind of implies some foresight, some prophecy from this benevolent force in itself. And this is what cosmopsychism is. It implies that the universe is intelligent. This unified whole, this unified consciousness has its own intelligence. Now this backs up the healing processes that we go through. This backs up our kind of innate wisdom. It actually empowers us all to understand that as microcosms, as drips of the ocean, we have the same wisdom within us. Fine-tuning of the universe. I could talk about this a lot. I should have probably listed a few of them, but I'm not. So, no, actually, no, I won't do that. So bringing it back to the macro. To quote Rumi, the soul has been given its own ears to hear the things the mind does not understand. If on an individual level we go through a spiritual awakening and we learn to trust these different aspects of ourselves, on a collective level, on the macro level, we also have to bring in more of these functions in our society, in the way that we treat, in the way we educate, in the way we treat the economy, in the way we treat each other, in our healthcare, in all aspects. We have to find a balance of these different psychological functions. Buckminster Fuller, what a name that is. In order to change an existing paradigm, you do not struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete. So it's the idea that what is required for where we're at in this time and space is a worldview that is more comprehensive and is more expanded, not only for individuals' mental health, but for the world as well, and for the way that we treat each other on a collective level. An important note with this paradigm on the micro level is that growth, enchantment, all of these states, they're cyclical, they're non-linear. It's not just like, here's the path to enchantment, just follow that road, you'll be fine, just all light, you know. There's going to be a lot of shadow work. Now the reason I bring this up is because through direct experience, if you have peak experiences, if you experience oneness, if you take a psychedelic trip, it's like, I've experienced something beyond myself, it's actually possible to then fall back within ourselves, to crave these experiences, to almost push ourselves further away from our waking experience. So really, enchantment comes in cycles. It comes in cycles. So when you're in the flow with enchantment, you feel the sense of connection, a sense of self-transcendence. So you feel your presence beyond the physical body. You kind of look at the skyline and you are the sky. It's the real absorption in nature. Rapture, all bliss. Like these are great. These are fucking amazing. But they're not like the nectar. They're not the nectar. Actually, spiritual practice and self-inquiry is the nectar. Like no matter what you experience in terms of bliss and enchantment, there are pathways and practices there, but it's important to always understand that we can then start to crave and become attached to the enchanted state itself. Because when we feel disenchanted, And I mentioned at the beginning the idea of depression, the concept of depression. Like, let's imagine that depression doesn't have a label, that it's just part of the experience. What is my experience, like, shifting? Like, my reality's changed a lot. What is my experience of depression now? It is disenchantment. You know, I experience what would, by certain psychologists, be labelled depression, but it's disenchantment. And by that, I mean, I feel disconnected from what I've experienced. I feel isolated, I feel separate. Again, the sense of attachment, a frustration and a craving that comes in. It's like, I've just known, and I've experienced what it's like to feel really connected and to feel oneness, and now I'm disenchanted again. And I had a really powerful experience within the past few weeks because I was going through this. This is the reason why I postponed the last talk. Talk about re-enchantment when you're disenchanted, like, doesn't make much sense, does it, really? I was experiencing disconnection and a depressive episode, right, for quite some time. I went on a solo retreat, booked a hut in Babelsberg, went there thinking this is going to be shadow work, like I'm going to be trying to understand causes of this depression. It's going to be tough, like, but I'm ready. Like, go in there, going to meditate, going to journal, going to just understand and learn from this recent experience. As soon as I got there, it was like my spirit, or this sense of connection, this kind of vertical channel was just like, you're acknowledging me, you're going out of your way, you're cultivating, you're back on track. And what it really felt for me was like a misalignment in my mission. And this was a quick, like, right, I'm back on track, and the reward through that was one of the most enlightening and beautiful experiences I've ever had. Like, I was on my own, but I wasn't. The presence that I felt with me, and a sense of connection with nature, and all of these experiences came from reconnecting. And it's transformed my entire understanding of depression to the extent that I know it's almost like I know now what I need to do next time I feel depressed. I just have to connect. It's not always easy. There's a lot of shadow work that comes with it. But this connection itself is, to the best of my understanding, right now as I talk, disconnection from something greater, disconnection from enchantment, forgetting myself again, forgetting that I transcend this body, this ego. We need things in place, responsibility. I've experienced psychosis, I've experienced depression, I've been suicidal. So it's really important we take responsibility with this stuff. We don't kind of spiritually bypass and paint worldviews that sound really enticing but aren't actually that rich, that don't really give us that much strength, you know? So it's important that we learn to integrate these experiences of enchantment, that we find balance, that we have faith. Faith is huge when experiencing depression. Like, to experience depression with faith and without faith is almost like a completely different experience, because when you have faith, you know it's for a reason. I knew there was purpose in my recent experience, I knew it, and that allowed me to kind of keep going until the answers became clear. Faith is basically the point between the lesson and the learning. That's where you need faith. When you're like, right, I don't understand why this is happening right now, but I've got faith that I'm going to understand, I'm going to learn something. A healthy ego. We don't want to kill the ego, we don't want to annihilate the ego. That's not what we want to do. We want to develop a healthy ego, and this is where Western psychology is really useful. To mature ourselves and to integrate these experiences along the way so we become stronger and stronger, and we can experience these really life transformative experiences of energies and sensing and intuiting without our egos kind of feeling overwhelmed by that. But ultimately, with a worldview that's more expansive, we have a safety net. We have something that we can fall back on. On a macro level, what this looks like in terms of enchantment is reshaping the current political, economical, educational structures from a viewpoint of enchantment. So understanding the connection, how we have to work together, the sacred nature, the aliveness of all things. This is another thing, like the experience of the aliveness of nature that extends beyond us, like the presence that extends beyond our body into everything that we see. If we understand that the earth in itself is a living organism, we treat it differently, you know? So it's really this, thank you, This idea that we transform, again, like this quote, create a new paradigm. Create a new paradigm for education. Create a new paradigm for politics, and make it so enticing that we will be drawn to this paradigm. Shared through compassionate education, it informs psychology. Actually, psychology as a field is probably ahead of all the others in terms of enchantment. If you look at transpersonal psychology, and even back with the likes of Abraham Maslow, Carl Jung, inevitably, as microcosms, if you look far enough into the psyche, you reach the answers yourself with this kind of stuff, which is why psychology tends to kind of be leading the way. Yeah, as I mentioned now, it enriches our relationship with the kind of shadow side of this stuff, because as far as I'm aware, I'm not completely deluded. There is a shadow side to the macro. It's commodifying enchantment. It's turning it into a product. We see this with mindfulness now. Mindfulness is commodified. Now, if we apply like the idea behind worldviews with mindfulness, we've got a lot of good teachers in the West that teach the kind of more expansive elements of it. But the kind of mindfulness 2.0, stuff that like, a lot of corporations are using for productivity and all this kind of stuff. So we've got this really expansive experience, this practice of awakening, of insight, of knowing truth. And we've just gone like, just get in the worldview that we already have, just get in there. Like, there's like fitting it into, just get in that fucking worldview, get in there. It's boxed in. And the really interesting thing, you get people that are having experiences, like employees that are just like, I don't know if I want to work here anymore. And then these stories come out like, mindfulness reduces motivation, and everyone's like, oh fuck, no, they just realise that the job that they're working in isn't for them, because again, going back to their hierarchy of values, it shifts. So people are having awakening processes through mindfulness in this worldview that has been forced and kind of constrained. Again, conceptualizing, keeping this just as a conceptual understanding. If we do that, we're missing the point. It just becomes a few nice slides and an evening that you remember maybe for like a day or two or a week. It depends how optimistic I'm being. If you conceptualize, you're not experiencing and making these shifts. So it's important to use that as inspiration. And on a macro level, you can imagine how easily these ideas can then become their own kind of dogmatic structures. It's a really fine line. And it's honestly one that I would imagine we would fuck up quite a lot, actually, in this process of getting all this stuff together. Again, a form of escapism. If we see enchantment as escapism from this reality, if we try and push away like this reality and escape into enchantment, we're actually doing a disservice, because the idea of enchantment is that David Bohm calls it the implicate order? Immanent divine, basically the experience of the divine permeating this reality. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm still here, but I'm in a different dimension. It's not like there's salvation at the end of this linear approach that I have to face. Like, I'm here now, and the dimension is different, but everything kind of looks different, even though this is what I thought was just one reality. So it's almost like when you give permission to this stuff, it can permeate ordinary reality as you yourself increase in consciousness. But if we're escaping this reality, that's when we experience ego death, depersonalization, derealization. Next talk on 26th of February, we'll cover that topic. It doesn't embrace existing systems. So this is another thing. If we just look at a system, right, and we just go, that's a load of shit, let's just get rid of it. What we're doing is we're entering the judging mindset, and we're actually not taking a balanced approach. When we talk of compassion and we talk of acceptance, this applies just as much to systems and structures as it does to individuals. So we have to approach current politics with compassion and say, right, let's understand how we got here. Let's understand why the political landscape is how it is. Not like this is wrong and this is right, because then again we're entering duality. We're polarizing these experiences. It's the same with all of them, with education, psychology, the economy, etc. quoted Jesus. I was like, do I quote Jesus? Yeah. Jesus said, it must be true, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few will find it. Enchantment and the evolution into oneness. It's not all, there's a lot of shadow work, because we're kind of here right now. If we reach a point, if this is a time of great change, it implies that the old is in need of change. And there will be change, and there will be growing pains, and there will be shadow work, as there is on an individual level. So it's not saying that we're going to be able to avoid a painful transition with this stuff. That would be naive. But it's also important to look at enchantment as a form of evolution and a different worldview that we can kind of share. It does start with ourselves. It starts with the work that we're willing to do as a microcosm. At what point, if you have all these kind of individual droplets in the ocean of unified cosmic bliss, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, at what point are enough drops enchanted that the whole ocean becomes enchanted, right? This is the idea. If we work on ourselves and we promote and encourage people to look within themselves to understand this stuff, then you start changing a landscape. And that's the only way that wider changes happen. That's the only way that collective changes, is when we each individually inspire ourselves first and look within ourselves. There are challenges, with like enchantment itself, there's a lot of emotional regulation, a lot of shadow work. We have, in my understanding, and some people maybe need less work than I do, but I need a lot of meditation, a lot of work. I've had therapy, I've had coaching, I continue to have coaching, I've got spiritual guidance. There's a lot of work around actually cultivating the mindset and the psyche and the spirit so that we're aligned and we're able to feel enchantment within ourselves. Like, it's not an easy process. It can be spontaneous, but it's not something that you attain. You kind of create a landscape and let that become part of your reality. So the awakening, the transcendence, the transformation, the evolution of consciousness begins with us, and then eventually we reach the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell. Look at the world around you. It may seem like an immovable, implaceable place. Implacable? What does that even mean? Implaceable, whatever. It is not. With the slightest push in just the right place, it can be tipped. This is actually, in terms of sociology, Malcolm Gladwell is a great writer. He talks more of it. He's still in an older worldview. He's still in the material worldview that talks of these kind of sociological changes that can happen. And it's proven in sociology, there's a tipping point. There's a point that we reach when enough of the individual creates a huge shift. It's not, the interesting thing with this is, it's not like, you kind of slowly progress to the extent and then it kind of happens. There's actually a tipping point where you get to a certain threshold and there's quite a radical change. I feel we're close to that, actually. I feel like we're really approaching that. More and more people in my experience, even my parents, they've evolved in ways I didn't imagine could be possible, and are really open to these spiritual experiences. I see it in a lot of people that I know, that people are kind of awakening to this stuff. We're all here tonight for this very reason. Whether we know it or not, we're here for this very reason. So the next stage is the tipping point, but it does begin with ourselves. And I think that's it.